Dude, we're live. But, you know, as I said, let's take it easy. People will be logging in slowly. Hold on. Let me fix my screen so that I have an idea of what I'm looking at. Okay, OBS is down there. Brilliant. Everything looks fine.
Your audio is a little cracky.
Is it?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Please
Someone's
don't do
gonna
this.
be pissed.
Please don't do this. Let's wait. You know, we'll wait for people to join the live, and then they'll give us the feedback if everything is fine or not.
Should I be watching chat comments?
No, actually, what you could do, you could say, you know, you could make a post and say that we're live.
I can do that. Never update my status. This is good. People are gonna wonder what's wrong. Let's see. Where is that link?
Everything should be fine. 0 people watching. It takes a couple of minutes. It's okay.
Yeah, no worries. People are busy.
There is 1 person watching.
Hello.
Maybe we could ask that person if the audio is any good. We got the chat. Please, chatter, say something. Or even, you know, who might be interested? The F-Storm group.
Yeah, I'll post this to them too. I haven't been on there in a while.
No, too busy. So guys, we need to know, is the audio any good? La 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 la. Mirce.
Beautiful audio, at least your voice.
Hi guys, Pedro is also online. Rip 3D is also online.
Awesome.
Let's see how the audio is. As always, I need the sound is good. Okay, great. So the sound is good. So you see, you are the only one complaining.
Okay, well, if it's just on my end, I can understand you fine.
It's the beard, man.
The beard messes up everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. Let me share that with F-Storm. When you type in your YouTube address, you just get a giant picture of your head.
Yeah, I know. My wife says that I'm a narcissist.
Based off of what?
She might be right.
Let me share this to your group. I don't know. Share. I am like social media barely competent.
So we need to make a social media survivor kit.
I need tips. Share in a group.
Carolina is also online. Hi, Carolina. So we have about 7 people watching, and I guess more will join us later. So I think, you know, it's enough. It's enough. We could start. Do you feel like starting?
Oh, I am ready to roll.
Okay. One thing that people always say and complain about is the fact that I drink too much whilst I talk, you know. But it's like my tongue. Yeah, cheers.
Cheers to you, my friend.
After like 10 minutes talking, after 10 minutes talking, my tongue feels like a towel.
That'll happen.
Hi guys.
What you need.
Okay, so I see there is a little group, 11 people watching. So I guess we can start. Yeah.
Let's do it.
So, Mike, first of all, I should say thank you for taking the time, you know, for doing this interview. We have already done one for the D2 conference page, but at the moment, I think I still have to publish like 3 or 4 interviews before yours comes in. And the reason for that is that I had to do a lot of work beforehand, because the closer we get to the D2 conference, the more hectic this will become, and there will be my work plus the D2 conference plus the YouTube channel plus and plus and plus, and
it never ends.
It never ends.
But thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
No, dude, it's my pleasure. Also because I mean I've had the privilege to talk to you for the D2 conference interview, and the talk that we had. I don't want to anticipate anything to the people that are going to watch it, but it was revealing to me.
Oh, I'm glad.
To the point that actually some of the techniques that we have been using with our own clients, we are currently reviewing. Because I mean, what you said, it made a lot of sense, and we're gonna
awesome.
We're gonna talk about it. But we need to test them, at least from our perspective, because there is always a little bit of a period of adoption, so to say.
And there's always like a certain amount that what works for one person probably needs to be at least shifted a little bit to work for somebody else.
Yeah, that's
not one size fits all.
That's exactly what I say all the time to the people that get in touch, because very often one of the biggest complaints that people make is you tell me that I could charge this amount of money for my pictures, but I'm not able to. And I'm like, okay, so probably you're not able to charge that amount. It's something that you kind of have to accept and take in as as a part of the service that you offer. Then of course with the time we can try and change a little bit the mindset and try and figure out ways to charge more money. But for now you shouldn't get hung up on how much you make, and it's one step at a time, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And changing prices is never fun.
No, it's not. And it's, it's not about changing the prices. It's about changing the mindset, rather. At least that's what I think. But anyway, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that stuff as well. So
we'll get to it. We don't want to give anything away.
Exactly. Okay, let's just start with this. I see that people are watching. There are 13 people online. I'm gonna look to the side of my screen all the time, listening to you and trying to put together questions and my own questions. Questions coming from. It's gonna get hectic, The other day when I was talking to Johannes, I think it was a better day because it was on a Sunday and people didn't have much to do. But at one point we had like 70 people online, so it was a lot of crossing between the comments and what I had to tell Johannes. But anyway, Mike, let's just start with a very simple question. Who are you? and what do you do?
I'm Mike Golden. I run a one-man, I guess I'm a freelancer technically. But we could talk about how I think of freelancers at some point, but I work for myself. The studio's name is 3 Marks. Been doing it for 3 years or so, and working mostly in residential marketing. Luxury residential marketing is the majority of my work. Before that, I was in-house for Thomas Johansson for about 1.5 years. And before that, I was art director of CGI at D-Box.
That's a big one.
That's where it started. I went to school for architecture and in Philadelphia, and very quickly realized that I liked making images of architecture a lot more than designing architecture. And so when I got out, I sent out a ton of resumes, and D-Box picked me up, and then I opened 3ds Max for the first time.
Oh,
and
so
it was frustrating.
That's what happened. You sent your resume and they just looked at it and they said, okay, you come and work for us, and they then taught you how to use 3ds Max.
Yeah, so when I showed up, I was pretty fluent in Modo and Rhino, and pretty, at least for the time, pretty handy in Photoshop, but never used 3ds Max. I had opened it once, I looked at it, I thought it was nonsense, and something's beeping. Thought it was nonsense, and they're like, you have to use it, dude. You don't have a choice. And so started working with it, and honestly, it didn't take that long to get used to. But at first, I was I was 26 or 7 at the time, but still very much a.
How old are you now?
34 going on 35. I was a very headstrong man. I'm just like, I don't want to use 3ds Max. This is terrible. And now I, can't imagine going back to Modo. But it is what it is. But yeah, I started 3ds Max when I got to D-Box.
So when did you work at D-Box? It was like 6 years ago?
Yeah. I graduated in 2011. So yeah, 7 years ago.
So you were also like sort of a late bloomer.
Yeah. I went to undergrad for philosophy.
That's what I wanted to ask.
I went to undergrad in Chicago for philosophy, and then I promptly put that degree to good use by working on a charter fishing boat in Alaska for 2.5 years.
Well, you had the chance to think about stuff, right?
Plenty of time, and the days are very, very long. So yeah, I did that, and then I didn't start graduate school until I was 26, 27, something like that.
But you could just start doing graduate studies in architecture without having a bachelor in architecture?
Yeah. So I had to do like a summer studio, which if you Masters of Architecture are at least in the US are either 2, 3, or 3.5 years, depending on where you go and what your undergrad degree is. So basically, if you don't have any architecture in your background, you have to do like a summer's worth of studio work to kind of catch you up. And then the first semester, you're playing a lot of catch up. But I like it. I think that a lot of architects have a very, they go to architecture school for undergrad. It's super intense. So that's all that they do during undergrad. And then they go straight from undergrad into master's. And all that they've done for like 7 years of their lives is live in studio. And I think that that's a shame. So, it took me a little bit longer than most to get to where I am, but, I wouldn't change it.
Dude, I'm asking you this because a question that people ask us all the time is how important it is to have like an architectural background when doing this job.
I think that most people find their way to ArchViz through architecture school or working for an architecture office. But I think you don't need an architectural background, but you do need to be able to read plans. You need to be able to understand buildings. And I think that the easiest way, and the most people that have that kind of knowledge or awareness are people that have studied it in some way or another. So I think you do need that. And I think you do need that to do it well. Because part of doing the job well is being able to take a 3-dimensional design and put that into a 2-dimensional image. So you have to be able to understand kind of the spirit or the partie in the architecture speak of the building to then turn that into an effective image. And then there's all the technical stuff, but anybody can kind of learn that. That'd be my 2 cents.
I'm asking because I know quite a few people that went from, say, game design or, VFX into architectural visualization. But then, again, talking to them, they had already some sort of interest in architecture when doing their stuff. So, they kind of spent quite a while researching the topic of livability, spatial design, all that kind of stuff, So I think, yeah, personally, it's of course very important. I think that architecture school, probably the biggest giveaway that people don't realize is the fact that they teach you. Well, it's not that they teach you, it's that they let you solve problems. Because, it's a lot of problems.
They let you or make you, depending on how you look at it.
So there are quite a few people saying hello. There is Johannes Lindqvist also online. He says, you have an awesome beard.
What's going on, everybody? Oh, thank you. I've been working toward a kind of crazy deadline recently, and so it hasn't been trimmed in a while.
That's a deadline beard.
Yeah, that's my wife is looking at me telling me I need to shave kind of beard or at least trim.
You pay $60 a month of support, for that beard.
Well, there's all the products and the grooming. I mean, if you take my time involved, it's very expensive.
I just want to divert for a second so that, if people at home watching this thing have questions, feel free to ask. I'm looking at both the chat and listening to Mike. But anyway, just wanted
I can't see the chat, but I encourage people to ask questions. I'm pretty much open to talk about anything.
I don't think you can see the chat. It's okay. Anyway, okay.
Here, wait.
So
where's the chat on YouTube?
Yeah, but try. Go, but mute the video. Make sure that you mute the video.
Yeah. Is everyone getting an echo or anything?
I don't hear it. Should be fine.
Awesome. Well, I can see the chat now.
Okay, good. There you go. Problem
What's
solved.
going on, everybody? Glad people are here.
So basically, I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you, and of course, you know, as always, this is not going to be a lamp in front of you, kind of like, you know. I've got a couple of comments of people saying, "Oh, awesome, awesome, you know, interviews," but just ask questions and shut up, okay?
Grill them time.
I know. So, okay, there are some questions coming in before I start with mine. Can you ask Mike what is the deadline for each project? Just because, as he said, before he runs the 3 marks just by himself, and the images for 277 fifth for RVA just blows my mind. So basically, I guess the question is, how long does it take for you to finish a project, or how long is a project staying in your pipeline? So
Gotcha.
Let's just jump into this.
Pedro, thank you for the compliment. Very much appreciate it. Glad you like the work. That project went through a few kind of stops because we got to a certain point with like amenities and stuff like that where the design wasn't finished. But initially, that project was 24 or 25 images total. And it started in mid-November, something like that, and ended May-ish. It kind of started to teeter out at the end. So what's that? December, January, February, March, April, May. So that was something like 6-7 months total. Did I do my math right there? I'm not sure if I did.
That's a long time, huh?
Yeah, the beginning is always really intense, especially when I'm trying to get everything put together and modeled, and you know, that first kind of get through the first like 3 images always takes the longest amount of time, and things then progress really quickly, and then they get really slow at the end because those are always the images with clients waiting on either furniture, or they're waiting to pick a space that they want to do if it's amenities, or they're waiting for design stuff. And so it's at that point that I'm usually starting either a couple small projects, personal projects, or actually starting another job and just kind of fingering them through as it goes along.
You really like use, at least from what I've been looking at recently, you really use all your free time to make a lot of research projects and personal projects, right?
As much as I can. Every time I try to take on like a big, I have an idea for like a house, and I'm going to do a full set, and it's going to be with this. I never finish those. I have dozens of those projects that have drawn out floor plans, or I started modeling a house and I never finished them. And so everything that I've posted like on the Droki page is done in one sitting. So it's like usually like between, if it's done in 3D, which most of it is, somewhere between like an hour and 4 or 5 hours tops.
So it's a relatively fast job, a little bit like, you know, the Beeple projects.
I don't know how he does them every day. To me, that is just absolutely insane. I don't know how he has a wife and a kid. My hat's off to that guy. That's amazing.
At the D2 conference, he told us that there was a project whilst the wife, you know, was pregnant, and it was about time that, you know, they had to go to the hospital. And then he said during the presentation, you know, going to the hospital, it's never like in the movies, you know, like, run, the water broke, blah, blah, blah. He said, you know, we just went to the hospital, and I was there, you know, talking to her, and at the same time doing an everyday. and she was in the bed. That guy, like, I think that, you know, Mike Winkelmann Beeple is, he's the definition of artist, you know. He's a guy that lives his life because of art. Like, yeah, I don't know, it's a little bit hard to describe, but you know,
he's created something every single day for what, 10 years or something crazy.
But he thinks about it, you know, consistently, and even if you spend a little bit of time talking to him, the discussion keeps going back to being this guy that does these crazy works, and you can really tell that his mind works that way. I don't know, it's a little bit weird to explain. I mean, I had the chance to spend a little bit of time with him the last time that he was in Vienna. Unfortunately, because I'm organizing the damn thing, I was not able to go out and drink with the guys. But even the people that had the chance to spend a little bit more time with him, they told me the same. Art lives in that guy, and sometimes you have to accept that there are people that are like this. So you even if you try to push yourself to make an artwork every day, you might end up burning out because of the fact that it doesn't really fit who you are as a person. But anyway, this is we open and close the
well, I think it's an important thing though, like for someone like him, it's obviously something that he's thinking about all of the time. Like I think that probably at this point not doing them is probably not an option for him. Like he would like it's part of who he is. And I think one of the things that's been talked about a little bit in like a lot of the posts that have been going around recently is, what do studios look for when they're hiring and all that kind of stuff. And for the 2 years that I was at D-Box, I was the one that got to be like the first, here's, 200 portfolios a week to look at. And then I'd pass on the ones that I thought were, worthwhile and discard the majority of them. And that was one of the first things that I would look for, not some insane 10-year streak like people has, but what are they doing outside of work? Whenever you see a portfolio that exists only of like their student work or the work that they've done in an office, that's always a bit of an alarm to me.
That's interesting.
It means they're not doing anything just because they want to. And it's a hard business to do just for money or just 9 to 5. Like if you're not really into it, it's not always worth it. You have to love it. I have to love it anyways.
That's funny that you say this. Like my next question is, what is the element of ArchViz that you enjoy the most?
Oh.
Like there must be something that you do and you say, oh, I cannot wait to, to do the light setup or whatever.
Oh, the actual part of it that I like the most. Yeah. I like modeling furniture, but I hate modeling buildings.
Okay.
So like that first, couple of weeks of a project when you're just roughing everything else and just sorting through plans that never seem to line up, that's drudgery to me. That's my least favorite part of the process. But then once that gets done, and you make a couple of materials to kind of rough things in, you have a couple of things in place, and you can start setting up cameras and lighting. That is easily my favorite part of the process, because every time I get to that point, I get really excited because I think it's going to be a really cool living room or a really cool whatever the image is. And then I get really bummed out because like the first thing that I look at looks terrible, and I'm like, this is garbage. This is never going to work, right? Like I think every image I've ever made at some point or another, I've just been like, it's a loser. It's just not, this one's never going to work. And then, but you push through that, and at some point something clicks, whether it's in the lighting, time of day, camera, one of those things, like of the element, like the base elements of the composition, one of those things clicks, and you kind of get a glimpse, not necessarily on the screen, but in your head, like, oh, this is going to be awesome. That's and then you're off to the races. And it's searching for that kind of like little moment of figured it out. That's my favorite part of the process. And then after that, it's just technical, right? Then it's just finishing. But finding that's the hard part. And I think that's the key to enjoying this job, is doing that well. Because if you don't get that done, or if you're placing your cameras because your client told you they want to see the entire room, then that image is an uphill climb all the way to the finish, right? Your composition is bad. Everything you do to try to make that image looks good is fighting against that one moment of it's a bad camera. Like fundamentally, I could do everything else much worse, but pick a good camera and this would be easier and it would look better.
This is actually something that we talked about already in the other interview. and I really like the approach that you come up with when, you know, like for instance, a client asks you for a crazy camera, which is basically to split the view in more cameras and more views. But one thing that left me thinking was, okay, but if you do that, don't you kind of have to deal with two pictures, and the client might say, okay, change that in that picture and change that in that picture. You know what I mean?
They're like, the standard like ArchViz like workflow from everyone I've talked to is first you provide cameras, right? Like 2 to 4 cameras that are done with a white box or wireframe or ambient occlusion or however you do it, but just kind of blah, 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 nothing in it. Here's, you know, your choices, and then you pick one and you stick with it. And that's your camera from then on in. And then you do first round of materials, and then you get that approved, and then you add lights or you add stuff or whatever else, and then you get that approved, and then you get one more preview, and then you finally get that approved. And that made a lot of sense back, 10 years ago when we had to do a lot of Photoshop. Moving a camera meant starting almost from scratch in a lot of cases, especially if you were Photoshopping in, I can remember like trying to put, like if we're going to put a bottle in, photographing it and Photoshopping it in as opposed to rendering it in. So that meant, if we change the camera, a lot of work just gets thrown out the door. But that's not the case anymore, right? Like now I'm moving a camera. My Photoshop, depending on how you work, and this isn't true for everyone, obviously, but I think for a lot of us, like the image that we're putting out of the frame buffer is a lot closer to the final image than it was 10 years or so ago. Mm-hmm. So
that's a very good point, yeah.
And so as a result of that, here's what I've often like found while I was working at D-Box and doing some of my earlier projects is you'd have 3 cameras, right? Like let's say you're doing a living room. You have 3 cameras and you have like one shot looking this way, one point looking out to whatever. That's really cool. And you have another one looking this way. And then you give them that one back in the corner just because you feel like you have to. And then they're like, oh, those other 2 shots are really cool, but it's only this one that we can see the whole room. So even though I like those other 2 cameras, that we need to show the whole room. And one of the ways that I don't show that camera anymore unless it happens to be good. And then I just make both of them. Like a lot of the work is duplicated, so I do a decent amount of time like setting up like custom LUTs and all that kind of stuff. It comes out of the frame buffer pretty close to where it wants to be finished. Moving a camera and turning a light a little bit doesn't take me that much time. And because the composition is sound, I'm not fighting that. You take that one camera in the back and the whole time it's like, well, that shader on that couch needs to be absolutely perfect. And that, detail needs to be perfect. And you're trying to do all these little things to make up for that one big thing that you messed up with at the very beginning. So it's a tough thing, I think, to do because you do end up kind of doing more work, but it's overall less time, and it's way more satisfying because as opposed to finishing that image and being like, it's another 16-degree camera that cut through 3 walls so we can see everything. You're like, I have 2 really cool shots. I have 2 images I really like, which makes, even if it does take longer, I'll take that any day. Like that feeling is something I'm after.
I feel like we should take a little break on this thing and maybe make a point, okay? Because you see, I've been doing now this YouTube stuff for a couple of years now, and I know that the internet is very polarizing, Like some people will understand what you just said, and some other people will run with the idea that you do 2 cameras and that's one image and you charge, X amount of money. Now, let's just say that you can do this only if you manage to be able to communicate with the client that this is what they are getting for a price that it's not the price of one single image, but it's a price of a service, of a consultation. And you can do it only if you know 100% what you're doing. And you know that what the client is going to go for is going to be worse than what you're offering.
Which is usually the case, whether they know it or not.
Well,
but you bring up a really, really good point, which is, like what I was just talking about, that is how I work. But there's a lot of things on both sides of like from starting from the contract that is set up so that I can work that way. Right. So if you're gonna even throw out the idea of doing what I just did, like you need it somewhere in your contract that you have control of that.
Yeah.
Like there's a line in my contract that I have sole discretion of cameras and number of images, because otherwise they're going to say, well, let's just have them do like 8 of that one kitchen and then we're done.
Yeah.
And you have to be set up from the beginning, both legally inside of the contract, but also how you pitch it and how you sell that and how you talk to your clients becomes super important. I still, for almost all of my new clients, usually, I'll get an email and, they'll say like, can you put a bid in? I'll put a bid in, and most of the time you don't hear back from anything. That's usually, they don't say like, sorry, we're going somewhere else. Usually they just never respond again. But, one of the things that almost always happens for me is, let's say that they come back and they say, we like it. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. Let's set up a meeting to see if we're going to work. And we go and we sit down and they go like, we need to talk about this, one round of review thing. And then I sit down and I have like a presentation about it. And I'm like, I know that that's very scary. I know you're used to having 3 or 4 rounds of review, but the first time you see this image, it's going to look almost done and you're going to end up with more images at the end. Because the goal with that, it's this hard line that you have to walk, which is when you show a client an image like that's a white ambient occlusion image, everyone is drawing their own picture in their head of what that's going to end up as. And people that don't do it for a living are not going to be very good at imagining that. Yeah. And even people that do deal with them every day, all day, they're going to come up with very different expectations for that image.
Yeah.
Right. And so even if you make an amazing image out of that white ambient occlusion render, what everyone in that room was expecting is going to be something different.
Yeah.
So you basically guaranteed that you are no longer going to have that entire room on your side, because some people are going to be saying, I thought it was going to be more dusky, or I thought it was going to feel brighter, or whatever it might be. So I skip it. I don't do it. The first time they see it, it has materials, it has lighting, it has, I most of those images I would personally sign off as I'm done. And then they tend to focus on the bigger picture, or I find they tend to focus on the bigger picture. But you also have to be open to the fact, I know none of us like making changes. And I used to get really, really frustrated about it, especially when I first started. I'm like, why would they want that? That's such a stupid idea. Like, that's a waste of my time. That's an insult to even do it. Like you posted before, changing a chair 3 degrees is never, ever, ever going to fix an image. But it will take me like an hour of post-adjusting masks. And when a client says those types of things, they're trying to express something. And part of our job is figuring out what that is.
Exactly. That's a very good point.
Like if a client tells me to move a chair, I've done something wrong. It's probably not that chair, but part of my job is to figure out what it is and to fix it, because maybe the camera does look great, but the room does look a little small. And at the end of the day, they're trying to sell apartments, or maybe I chose a little bit too much of a vignette shot and I do need to widen the camera. Like you have to be open to the fact that when a client requests something, there's a reason for it, even if it's not what they're requesting.
But then at that point, you gotta kind of consult the client about it, because, maybe the client will force you to go ahead with turning the chair by 3 degrees. But then you have to tell him, okay, I understand. Probably, the problem is this. Then instead of turning the chair, because that's not gonna fix the problem, we can try and do something else, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes you just turn the chair because they just wanted to have a comment and they wanted to have some ownership of the image. And while that can be frustrating, it's certainly understandable, right? And if just turning that chair and hitting render again fixes, that part of the problem, I'm all for it. But more often than not, just taking all of your clients' comments and doing them all is a mistake, because they're sitting and saying to themselves, this doesn't feel big enough, or there's something that they're trying to get at. And if you just do what they ask for, they're not going to get the result that they're expecting, and they're going to be disappointed. So when they say things like turn a chair, or what if we make that couch blue instead of green, you say, well, why? You know, they might just not like green, and then, yeah, sure, let's go for blue. But if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, it might be, well, I just feel like if we go with a lighter blue, the room will feel bigger. Okay, well, that's the problem, right? Like, that's what they're trying to say, is that the room doesn't feel big enough. And so then you have a conversation with your client, and you know, I think Johannes talked about it. Johannes. Sorry about that, bud.
Okay.
Talked about it last time, which is and then I just lost my train of thought.
We were talking about the client. Yeah, sorry.
Face-to-face meetings, right?
Yes.
Like, I try to do as much of my meetings in person as possible, especially when we're reviewing an image, because then you can say, okay, so what if you feel like that might make the room bigger? That's probably not the problem. Maybe we can do this, or we can do that, or we can change the camera, or we can push out the background, or there's a lot of things that we can do to address that desire of the client. And whether or not we change the couch is kind of inconsequential. But if you want them to be happy, the room needs to feel bigger afterwards. That's like in this little example.
Yes.
That's what they need to feel happy. So changing the couch, that might help them feel better because they feel like they have some ownership of the image. But it's that core thing that if you don't fix it, your client's going to be like, okay, well, you did what I said, so next image. And that's not a great way to end an image with a client, or for yourself for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, because then, a lot of people, one of the mistakes that I see artists do is to run through the process of finishing images just because, they cannot control the process, and then they end up with a very less than average picture for the client because they were not able to, manage the conversation, and they don't have anything to show for. And this was an issue that I've also had in my own career, because at one point I was not able to take the conversation by the horns, and, I ended up having images that I was not 100% happy with. Yet, of course, I went back and fixed them, so I kind of had something for my own portfolio. But this,
which is important.
Yeah. But this goes to show how important it is, to really learn how to improve the communication with your client. Because it's not only in the interest of the client, it's also in your own interest.
Big time. I mean, if you keep cycling around kind of the topics that have been floating around on the forums for a little bit, like finding new clients and all that kind of stuff, the easiest way to find new clients is just to keep going back to the same ones. Like if you like working with them and they like working with you, you get to skip all of those awkward getting to know each other phases of like, no, that's not what I meant, and blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And the more that you can keep your current client happy, the more that work just comes to you. In 3 years, I think, since I've been out on my own, something like that, I've yet to send an email asking for work or looking for work or anything else.
That's a bad technique.
Like the best thing you can do if you want to find clients is do good work. Like if you have a client, impress the hell out of them, over deliver,
I have a couple of questions from the chat, so I'm just gonna rewind a little bit the chat. So
let's do it.
Okay, Johannes had to leave because he was busy. He's got kids. What do you?
Forgiven.
I added that. It's not true. It's not. It's not true. If I had kids, I would use my kids as an excuse for everything. So I am Stever416. The daily guys seem all to use C4D. No, not necessarily. I know a lot of people that do daily renderings without Cinema 4D and they use other software. It's by the way, there is a guy watching, the French Monkey. He uses Cinema 4D, but I don't know. Maybe he wants to make a comment about the software. I think that at this point, talking about software, it's
I think a lot of people like Cinema 4D because I think that it's very usable, like especially if you've never used any 3D software.
Yeah, it's a very simple software to learn. I use
it. I think that, and that's probably why.
Carolina is asking, do you recommend any photographer or artists to follow just to study composition, colors, etc.?
I don't have. So there's a book on composition. The best book I've ever read is by a comics. He draws some comics, and he's also a storyboard artist professionally, I think for DreamWorks. His name is, I'm gonna mess this up, Marcos Matthew Mestra, something along that. Look up Framed Ink. It's an amazing book about composition. It's the best thing that I've ever seen, like explicitly talking about composition. As for
guys, listen to this, write it down because I also need it later.
For photographers that I really like and really look at a lot, there's a guy named Todd Hido. Here, I can show you some of the examples so you can see whether it's worth it looking up for him, at least for this one.
Oh, there we go.
So he...
Wait, I will maximize your screen so that... oops. No, okay, that's a bad move because then it gets like full view.
He has one of the things that I really like these photographs really deserve being looked at in person, or at least in higher resolution than webcam of these. He has a really painterly quality to his photographs, which is something that I am kind of obsessed with. I feel like now that we have all of this photorealism and, like that's easier and easier to do, we have to start making decisions about what we want to do with it. And here's the one that like I fell in love with when I first saw it. Hopefully that looks okay. Can you see it? Boom. So yeah, it's got a great sense of color, a great sense of composition, and like kind of the texture or tone or feel of his work is awesome. Richard Tushman, just look him up. He did something called Hopper Meditations, where he photographed people and then he built these little sets and then photographed them and then he put them together. It's gorgeous. Who else? Gregory Crewdson's great. I'm literally looking at my bookshelf. And then anything you can find of concept art. Buy Assassin's Creed Art of book.
Oh yeah, the art of books are fantastic. I'm also like reading some like what I like to do is read comic books, not like journals, like proper books on how they write comics, because in comics there is so much, like, there is the person, the focus of the story, and there is the background. And sometimes that's what we do in ArchViz, we kind of have to write the building, even though it is the focus, it's still the background of what we are trying to do. There must be something else in the picture that tells some sort of story. Although, sorry, I'll let you.
No. I totally agree with what you're just saying. And like, there's a book that I think anyone making images should read 3 times easy, which is called Understanding Comics by, what is his name?
Hold on.
Scott McCloud. You have it?
Hey!
Boom.
You see?
Everyone should read that book.
I don't make up stuff. I really do study. People tell me, but how do you know all this stuff? I read, man.
that book, if it comes to like how you tell a story and how you communicate visually.
Hey!
It's great. It talks the stuff that it talks about with Japanese comics and how they set a scene by showing details before they show the whole thing. I did a thesis in school about narrative storytelling as it affects architecture and the design process, and that book was like the Bible of the whole thing, because the whole idea, I think, in a successful image, I think you feel something besides like your visual stimulus. I think we've all looked at images and be like, oh, that's a cool image, and then moved on. And then we've also looked at an image that we're just like, you can like smell the rain, or you can, you know, have a feeling of what that sunlight feels like sitting next to that window, or you're scared out of your mind, or you feel peaceful as a result of it. I think successful images do something besides just communicate a visual thing. And that book goes a long way to explaining some of the things you can do to try and evoke that as much as you can. Because in architecture, you can't put, in ArchViz, paid ArchViz at least, like there are limits to what a client's going to let you get away with as far as the story you're telling. But usually all you need is that one little kind of hook to get somebody into it, I think. And I try to use environment, I think, more than anything else. Even though I'm doing marketing images, so I have a lot of blue skies.
The sky is always blue in ArchViz.
When you're buying an apartment, it is always blue.
It never rains.
Never. But if you look at Mir's work, right, like I think that's one of the things that, you know, I and so many people love of their work is that you look at their images and, you know, you can like feel that fog on your skin, or you can, you know, feel that kind of setting sun on a very hazy day. Like those atmospheres come through in a way that you can connect with it besides just visually. You can kind of put yourself into that atmosphere. Yeah. And as soon as you take that step of imagining yourself inside of an image, well, then that image is no longer something you're looking at on a screen or on a piece of paper, but it's in your head. And that's the line at which I say successful image. If you can get viewers to do that.
A couple of years ago, we had Mir at our conference. And I think
missed
it
that
was
one, and I'm very upset about it.
It was a very, I mean, you know, Trond is a very inspiring guy, and I think that the thing that stuck the most, but now that I think about it, I'm not sure if it was him that he said that. I really, you know, I've been watching so many lectures of ArchViz artists, but one of the very important points that was made, I think it was him. I'll have to ask him. Anyway, was that a rainy image, a foggy image, you know, it kind of creates this emotional connection with the viewer because it kind of makes you feel like you see a building and you want to go inside it to fetch shelter, you know, to look for shelter. Mm-hmm. So in a way, although it makes, you know, the image looks dramatic and so on, it kind of creates this link where you say, oh, you see, now it's raining. I wish I could go inside a building to look for shelter.
Oh, and here's a warm, glowing building that
there you go.
For said purpose.
Yeah. So, you know, it's of course, it's debatable, you know, because you might try to make it with that intention, but then you fail because the building is so warm that it looks like it's on fire and you don't want to go inside it. But, you know, these are very good and very valuable points to consider when making images, you know?
I think that I think so long our industry's been obsessed with photorealism and getting to that level of this looks like a photograph, that like now, for better or worse, we're like practically there, right? Like you can always pick them out, but we're pretty close. And now photographers have had that ability to make it look like a photograph since they've existed by definition, right? And so what's made a good photograph from a bad photograph, or a good photographer from a bad photographer, we as an industry are just now like really grappling with that question, I think. And it's not going to be technical proficiency that's going to get us there in the end.
I'm going through the questions of the guys because there are a couple coming in. Just give me a second. Okay. Yes. So, well, there is a user V Ali. I think that we have already answered your question. So, what do you recommend to get the feeling for a good camera? I think that looking at these books, it's a way to start. I think, you know, maybe shifting your interest to photography. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I absolutely agree. But the other thing is that when you're looking for that camera, you should have at least like stand-in furniture in there, and you should be adjusting the lighting, right? Like there's this beautiful picture by Ezra Stoller, which if you guys don't know him, he's like my favorite architectural photographer. that he's looking at a lobby, and it's just this like kind of plain modernist lobby, that glass lobby, and he's looking in, looking out, and the thing that makes it beautiful is the shadows, right? And so if you're just looking around in your viewport looking for that composition, that's always going to look boring until you put a light into it. So I work in black and white at that phase. I don't mess with color because it's too confusing. So I work in black and white. I usually have furniture and, you know, a couple different, usually I'm almost always using Guthrie skies. So I'm cycling through all of those. I might try playing with the sun. It's just whatever I can do to find something that gets me excited.
Well, there you go. You got the answer. Somebody's asking, Pablo is asking for you to talk about your Drokis project.
Oh, Droki.
Droki. It should be Droki.
Everyone else says Drokus. I think I'm wrong. Droki started last May, something like that. I'm a perfectionist by nature, which is kind of debilitating when you want to make sketches and actually put them out online. You don't want to put anything out that's like you're not 100% proud of. And then as a result, like what should be like a 2-hour sketch ends up being like a day that I didn't have time to spend on that sketch. And so I started that Droki account, which just comes from croquis with a C is the French word for sketch. And so I put a D in front of it, so it was digital, and like the domain was available and the Instagram handle. I'm like, okay, done and done.
Like the book, the Croquis book, you know, the Spanish books of architecture.
Yep.
I think I should have some.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, so it started as just like I want a place where I can post stuff that doesn't have my name attached to it, at least initially, so that I can make like a sketch in an hour and then post it. So I want to do more. It was trying to deal with that, and so I did that. I wanted to do it every day when I first started, and I'm like, Beeple's crazy. I don't know how he does anything. It's just nuts. So I try to do as much as I can, and now I'm, you know, I've been involved with Kitbash 3D, so there's a bunch of stuff on there. I should tell you what it's morphed into. It's morphed into a means for me to test ideas, like quickly test ideas. So there's a couple images there where there's like a guy with an umbrella and a street light, and there's no city behind him. There's a bunch of mist, and there's like 2 images on either side of that were me looking specifically at Todd Hido, saying like, okay, trying to break down like what are the components that make his images look painterly? Is it just a texture thing? Is it just the fact that he has fog in a lot of his photos? You know, I don't think I got anywhere near the quality of his work, but I got some ideas as to how do I take steps in that direction. If I ever get an opportunity to work in that professionally, I already have a head start, right? If I get to make really painterly images, I've tried out a few things. I have some ideas. Give me a couple more hours, and I think we can get there. Then there's another set of images that are inspired by Hugh Ferriss. They're literally looking at, if you guys don't know Hugh Ferriss, you should. He's a must-have. Do you have Hugh Ferriss hanging out?
I don't. To be honest with you, you're catching me by surprise.
Oh, really? Wait, you know his work. Because everyone knows his work. At least they've seen it. They should. Here we go. Hopefully I didn't have too much of a plumber crack on that one. Probably should have thought of that first. He did a bunch of stuff that looks like this.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. We had a course at university where we had to do, absolutely. And actually, you know, it's funny that you mention it. One of the works that one of the videos that it's actually in the pipeline right now, I have it on my whiteboard, is, you know, very often the argument that people have is that rendering, it's not art. And actually, you know, if you go back in time, those pictures that you just showed, those were commissioned by architects to, you know, illustrators.
Yeah, so like the award in America for like best architectural illustration of the year, and like it's a very old school society, so it's usually a watercolor, but it's the Hugh Ferriss Award. When people were building, when skyscrapers first started getting built like at the beginning of the turn of the century, Hugh Ferriss, like more than anyone else, defined how that looked, right? Like he was the guy. if you wanted your building to get built, you got him to do the image of it. And they were all there. These you can find online, if you look him up, you can find him doing it. These big charcoal and other media drawings that are like 7 feet tall, 10 feet tall, 4 or 5 feet wide. But like, that's one of the ones that like I kind of remade.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say.
But like, he has this like, and here's another one that I kind of remade.
In that project with your little, what did you call the little guy?
Oh, I call him Roke.
Oh, wait, let me find the picture so that I can overlay it. Hold on. Let me find your message, because I think that you... I'm trying to get it, but of course the page is not loading right now. Photos.
We're using up all the bandwidth in Tel Aviv right now.
Yeah. I'm using all the internet of Israel. Because such a beautiful picture.
While you're looking for that, so his work is absolutely gorgeous. Like, this is what people were paying top dollar for, you know, in the day when he was around. And yes, it's very noir, but it's also very, you know, like kind of poetic, and this very, there's a grandeur to it that's just amazing. And the lighting is very unnatural. If you actually like start to compose it, it's almost all up lights, but then there's usually some down lights. It's all over the place. And so how do you go about doing it? Oh yeah, there's a video of that guy, of me making that guy.
Yeah, I put it briefly because I don't want to take away the attention from the main conversation. Sorry.
But so I stumbled on this company called Kitbash 3D. This would have been like September maybe, and they put out like an Art Deco kit, mostly for concept artists and people kind of working in the game or matte painting industries. Where it's a kit of buildings that you can put together and make scenes out of. And I thought it was awesome. I made a couple images with it. The Art Deco kit came out, and I'm like, you know, all this is like the Art Deco skyscraper era, and I'm like, it's not going to be exact, but I can get that idea across, and I don't have to do any of the modeling. So if I'm going to spend 4 hours, I can spend 4 hours on lighting, which is basically, you know, what it ends up taking to figure it out. And it gives you this opportunity to like break down an image. How did he construct it? Because even though it's very unnatural lighting and it's done by hand drawing, the guy knows his stuff. Like, he has a very thorough painterly understanding of light, and composition, contrast, tonal values. So by kind of recreating them, the goal wasn't to make it like spot on, but the goal was to kind of make something that had a similar composition, if not as exact as I could, that had a similar, I don't know what you call his work. It's not painterly, which is like my favorite word. There's a looseness that leaves a lot of room for the imagination in like a good way. And I'm sure that there's a better word. Now I'm gonna have to try to figure it out. But how do you instill that kind of into a rendering that wants to be precise and exact and everything else? And so, you know, those images were an attempt to figure that out. Also, full disclosure, I am doing 3D supervision now for the Kitbash guys. So I help make sure the kits work. But they give out free kits. You guys should check them out. They're a lot of fun. So there's my little plug. But it gives you an opportunity. Modeling takes a lot of time. And if you just want to test the other parts of ArchViz, you can use them for that, right? Like, I'm always jealous of photographers because they can just go out and practice. Whereas if we want to make a scene, there's a lot of work we need to do before we start making a scene. And anything you can do to make more images, do more work, put out more things that like you dig, the better. Okay, end rant.
Hold on, because I have a couple of Isa is also, thank you. I have a couple of questions coming in. You know, a very good question maybe is, what do you do if the client doesn't like your almost finished first image. So like if he says, no, we have to start from scratch. I mean, has that ever happened?
I've never had to go back and start from scratch.
Okay.
Because, you know, contractually, we've already agreed that we're doing this living room. Right? So I had to model the living room regardless. And, you know, the floor material, I might have gotten it wrong, which is on me. But the floor material is the floor material. So, like, you're never really starting from scratch. And in kind of the world of work that I'm generally in, the furniture was also picked and approved by an interior designer more often than not. So there's a lot of that stuff. Like, I might be starting from scratch on lighting. That's happened maybe once or twice. And I have gone back and started from scratch on cameras. Not often. But like, again, like I've been working in like the luxury residential world for a while now.
Yeah.
If there's a camera I really want to make that I know that they're not going to want, I'll still make it and give it to them. But I'm not going to say like, here's your image, knowing that they're going to, you know, like I have an idea of what they're going to not want or want. So I'm trying to be mindful and respectful of that. But no, I've never started from scratch. If they don't like it, if they think the image isn't working, then, you know, like we were talking about earlier, why? What is it that you're trying to communicate that I'm failing at? And but what I don't do is say, like, if they say the room's too big, I don't say, okay, well, we'll just make the camera wider. You know, like I generally don't take a lot of like specific directives like that, because maybe that'll work and maybe it won't. Maybe I need to move the camera altogether. Who knows what I have to do? Let's not commit to something because we're sitting in a boardroom and want to agree on something. Yeah. My general position is like, okay, next time you see it, it will look bigger.
Also, maybe I want to add a small little thing. Here, you see the difference between a professional visualizer that really sits down with a client and says, we're going through all the points. This is a contract. And that's what you have to do, because that's the problem that I face very often with my clients coming to me and saying, I cannot manage my, you know, the architect or the developer. And I tell them, how is your contract? And they say, I don't have any contract. And I'm like, if you do not write a contract, the architect will send you drawings and updates of the design until the deadline. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't work without a contract. And your contract should just be like a boilerplate, this many number of images, this much money. Timing, what the client's responsible for, what you're responsible for, when they're allowed to request things, what they can request. You know, like in the example before, have I ever had to go back to the drawing board? No, because a lot of the things they can't change, right? Once, if I'm modeling all custom furniture for a project, they can change it, but there's a really expensive fee to do so. So by all means, let's change that chair. That'll be a nice little addition to the bill. But so there's a lot of things that they can't do within the contract. And anything that they want to do beyond that, the contract's set up so that I'm not frustrated by it. If they say, you know something, hate all of that furniture, we're going to start again, that's fine. Now I'll be billing per hour as I remodel and do all of that stuff. And, you know, I have no complaints. But your contract should cover all of those things. And your contract should also cover what happens if you guys get to an impasse, right? They want more changes. You don't have time to do them. Let's say you don't have time in your schedule. Those are things that contracts are there to answer before they happen. Because if you agree on something beforehand, it goes so much simpler afterwards, right? Like no one contests. I've never had a problem where a client says, I want this changed. And I say, well, that's outside of the scope of the contract, so there's going to be additional fee. And then say, well, that's not fair. It is fair because we agreed to it beforehand. Before anything was on the table, we signed an agreement that said this is fair for all parties.
One thing that I'm actually thinking to start implementing in our contract, even though, you know, it might not be true, is to tell the client, listen, I have time to work for you until this date, and afterward, that's it. You know, the project is done and I hand it over. Simply because, you know, one of the issues working in this field is that time is taken lightly, you know, and people think that they can reach you anytime. So setting a date, like an expiration date, will make sure that after that date, you're not doing anything anymore for that client. And, you know, of like...
I've had some friends that have contracted images through Mir, through the, like, a lot of my friends are architects as a result of having gone to school to be one. And from my understanding of Mir's process is that when you say, I need, you know, 3 images of this project, you get a week per image per artist, right? So they'll start Monday morning and they'll deliver something Friday afternoon. And so if basically, like, the more you hassle them, like, kind of the worse the image is going to be.
Yeah.
But that being said, Mir generally works on competition images, where the architect has a real deadline of when those images need to be submitted. Whereas if you're on kind of the other side of the industry where I live, the developers making their own rules anyways, as far as time goes. So I've thought a lot about, how do I put in a time clause? And I've not figured out a good way to do it.
Maybe I gave you a good inspiration.
I know exactly why you want it, and I want it so badly as well.
Because, you know, at one point, I mean, at one point you need to schedule, a project shouldn't take longer than, say, the budget that you need to make it. Yeah. So, you know, at that point, you might as well just say, that's the end of the game, you know? If you need any more help, you need to please contact me after 3 weeks, you know? Because in that 3 weeks, I don't want to hear your voice anymore. It's like, stop talking.
Let me get my temper back. Let me forget about what just happened, and we can talk again.
There is a question from, I think, an Indian guy that says, you know, what is the best way to start without having, like, paying leads and stuff, and how to get expert. I'm trying to reconstruct the phrase. You can also take a look. It's a little bit up. But anyway,
what was the name?
Akshay Arora. But anyway, there is a guy that I recently started to follow. He's been working for Disney, and basically he said in one of his videos that the best thing to do in order to start doing art is not to do it for money. Meaning, if your priority is to put food on the table, you should have a job that allows you to put food on the table, and you should do art on your own terms, but not doing it for work. Now, there is a book from Maslow that talks about the same exact thing, and I made a video about it. It's called, you know, The Pyramid of Needs for Designers, Learning from Maslow or something like this. It's a video that I made. But it's actually a thing that resonates a lot with me because, you know, it talks about the ability of growing as a person without having to worry about the monetary aspect of, because, you know, it's a very important component of your life. You know, without money you cannot pay rent, you cannot do anything. But anyway, I wanted to ask you this question: how do you get started without any paying leads?
I mean, I agree with what you said. I think that like, you know, my story is that basically I had been working in-house for 4 years, or, you know, almost 4 years. I had been doing a lot of freelance in, like, what little free time I had. Excuse me. So, like, saving money on that side, so that when my, like, first big project came along, me and a guy named Mike Cloudeman did it. We went out and did it. We had some money saved up. We had a big project that we knew would carry us for a certain amount of time. And so it was like, boom, that's the opportunity. I have the skill set. I have money set aside, ready to make the jump. You know, if you're just learning 3D, you either have the option of getting a job doing something to pay your bills, like you were saying, and then learning 3D and composition and all of the, you know, artistic side, like that's something you have to develop in yourself. Or you can get a job at a firm that will teach you, right? Like, you know, I wasn't new to 3D, but like I had never made a photoreal rendering when I started at D-Box. I barely used V-Ray. I'd never used 3ds Max. And so learning on the job. But yeah, I think starting your own thing without some clients that you've already have that are happy with your work, that are consistently coming back to you, is a really scary thing.
Can I add one thing? There was an article from Forbes, I think, from a couple of years ago, that talks about, you know, the social contract being dead. And basically, it's an article written by an executive from, I don't know, Microsoft or a big guy. And basically, he says that, you know, anybody who is willing to go into freelancing, they should understand the real meaning of the word value. Because once you go into freelancing, you can only do it if you can produce real value, you know? Like there is value, saying, in making a picture, a rendering, and you get paid that little money that whoever is willing to pay will pay. And then there is real value in making an image that then, you know, that will help selling a building that will make a lot of money. If you're able to do that, then you have something that you can use in order to go into freelancing. But if you don't, you're basically buying into a lie, because you're making yourself a worker for a company, but without having the company to commit to a salary, to you know, a specific set of rules which in a way kind of protect you from being abused from clients. When actually, if you don't have any clue of how to do this job and you jump into freelancing, you're basically shooting yourself in the stomach, not on the foot. You know, and
even worse than the foot.
And this is something that people really have to consider, because it's very easy to say, "Oh, I'll be a freelancer and I'm free," just like the word freelancer says. Since
I can work 30 hours a week and I'm going to make so much money.
Since I've been a freelancer, I swear to God, I've had weeks that I logged in 114 hours of work. I mean, you guys do the math in 1 week. and you know,
I think
that
3
was
years in, I think I average about 85.
Jesus, man. So,
you know, it's... If you count, like, sketch images, which are fun and, you know, rejuvenating or refreshing to me.
But it's part of the research and development, you know?
But yeah, like, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse.
You gotta put this into your working hours, in a way, you know?
Yeah. There's this romantic idea that, you know, the hard part of going out on your own is taking that leap. And no matter how ready or how not ready you are, stepping into it is going to feel like a leap. But if that's a leap off of a cliff, you have the choice of whether or not to have a parachute on before you jump. You know, like I have this kind of like same thought, and I guess I'll try to put it into words now, which is because there's this big question going around of, you know, how long can you be a freelancer and everything else. I don't think of myself as a freelancer, and I haven't thought of myself as a freelancer since I started working full-time on my own. So there are a few people that I use that help me with some furniture stuff when I need some extra help. There's a great guy out in Colorado that does really good hard surface modeling. They help me provide my work to my clients. I think of them as freelancers. I think of myself as a small business. And I think that if you think of yourself as a freelancer, and if you're just doing work for other studios, or if you're doing work for other architecture firms, or just like little pieces here and there, you kind of are a freelancer. When you decide, okay, I'm going to sit down and make this seriously, I'm going to, you know, establish an identity within the industry. I'm going to work professionally, which means I'm not going to work without a contract. That contract's not only going, I'm not only going to hold my client to that contract, but I'm also going to hold myself to that contract. You know, like once you start operating professionally, you're a small business, even if you're one person. And the idea of is that sustainable or not? And is there a cap and everything else? There's obviously a cap in how much I can do. As one person, only so many hours in the day. Wife is not very happy with how much she gets to see me as it is. Bless her soul. I have a wonderful, wonderful, incredibly understanding wife. In case you're watching, I love you, baby. But there's obviously a cap to that. But at the same time, my overhead is quite low, right? Like I have an expensive workstation, but I only have one. You know, like my office is, you know, pretty tiny. And I don't have to spend time finding more work to keep employees busy, right? So there's a trade-off to how you want to grow and everything else. But I don't think that the definition of a freelancer is, and specifically for our industry, because freelancer is not, I think, such a dirty word. If you're a writer and you don't write only for one thing, then you're a freelance writer. But
exactly, that's a very good point.
You're still a professional writer, and if you work in the VFX industry, you know, one movie might go out to like 8 different firms to handle all the VFX work, and those firms will then trickle down to individual artists that do specific roles. And so their freelancing is not a dirty word either. But I think in ArchViz, at least for me, you're a freelancer if you're not being professional. Like once you become a professional in ArchViz, and I very much want everyone to understand, I'm not talking about freelance writers or a lot of other freelancers. If you're approaching your things the same way a company would, then you are a small company. Yeah. And I think it's more about your professionalism and your approach, right? There's nothing that there's a lot of things that I can't do that bigger companies can do, right? As far as time that they can deliver things, number of projects they can work at once, all of those sorts of things. But there's nothing fundamentally different, right? We're still producing the same thing. We're still all doing all of the same work. So, okay, more rants, sorry.
No, it's great that you're saying this because another thing that I read a while ago is that, you know, one of the biggest issues of our modern society and, you know, people feeling oppressed by corporate life and so on, again, this idea that, you know, we've been able to transform everything into freelancing, which is a little bit of a lie as well if you look at it. Because, you know, think about it. If you have a job that you can only do in one specific way, you're not basically freelancing. You're a guy that is, you know, doing a job by himself, pretending, yeah, you know, to be employed by somebody, because eventually, you know, you cannot kind of stream out and branch out and go into different fields, which I think you know, the community at the moment is reacting to. You know, you see a lot of ArchViz artists learning a lot of new skills and going into other fields, which is eventually the natural reaction to what the market is becoming. But also one thing that you said that it's very important is the fact that you should consider yourself as a small business, because the moment you consider yourself as a small business and you take yourself seriously and consider yourself as a small business, then you will also start to project yourself into the future, and you're gonna start asking your questions. You know, when do I get a secretary? When do I get somebody that is going to do the modeling for me? When do I take somebody that is going to do the lighting so that I can do more client facing? You know, all those kind of things. And I think this is one of the big issues that people also going into freelance, they do it because they see the quick result, which is, you know, maybe I get 500-600 euros for an image now, and I don't have to work for it for a week. And then the reality of things is that they end up working 3 weeks to make one image.
And that, yes. and you get paid 3 months later.
Yeah, and then the promise is, yeah, but we'll give you more work, and you'll be like, okay.
As soon as I hear that, I tell them, well, when you get work that can afford me, come back.
Dude, listen, we are 1 hour and 20 minutes in. I think, that...
Fabio, the time flies talking to you, buddy.
Likewise, dude. Likewise. But anyway, I really hope you can make it to Vienna this year. Come and visit us.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to keep a straight face, man. And I want to leave a couple of minutes just to see if people have some questions to ask you.
Yes.
And then, somebody's asking to write down all the names of the books. If you want to make a comment later, you can.
I'll put a comment in after this is over.
I would appreciate it so that people can find the books that we talked about.
And then pin it at the top, and people can find it, and good to go.
If you guys have any questions, this is the time. Let's see. Do you keep your eyes on the chat as well?
Thank you, Pedro. That's very nice of you. Yes, but I'm not really reading all of it. I'm just looking at it.
Okay. Yeah, well, people seem to be very happy. I am personally very happy. I think that this was very educational also for me, and
Good.
I really liked this dynamic, because I think as I said in the very beginning, for me talking to you the first time was like getting into this cave on top of the Mount Everest and finding you sitting on a rock glowing, and it's like you giving me all this information. I was like, all right.
I think maybe you just need to raise your standards a little bit, Fabio.
No, but it's okay, because this gives you kind of like a picture of what the situation is at the moment. I think that one of the biggest issues is that people are trying to do their own thing without necessarily having a sense of where they should go, in which direction. And to me, it's at the moment it's becoming even more clear that people should try to be better workers, should try to understand really how corporate works, try to do more career, because eventually, this freelancing will either kick you away from the career of, being a freelance artist, so to say. It will not teach you anything. It will just make you hate the profession. When actually, if you work in a company and you do you kind of, I want to put it, in a religious way, although I'm not religious. If you carry your own cross and you learn how to put up with the problems of the job inside a company, you might really learn something. And I'm not supporting companies, I'm very much on the side of freelancers. But sometimes I think that what people fail to understand is that they have been sold the lie that freelancing is better. And it's not necessarily like this, Yeah. Until you do your share of work under somebody that can teach you something and you really learn something, then you're not able to go into freelancing.
Well, the other, just like, I know we're trying to wrap up, but the one other thing with that is that freelancing is a really expensive, painful way to learn a lot of like the fundamentals of both the industry and like the art or technical sides of things, right? At some, like the example we keep going back to, like the chair or the couch, that whatever it is. When you're first starting, you say, okay, yeah, I'll move the chair and then we'll be good to go. And then you send that image back and they're like, still, maybe if we add curtains. No, get rid of the curtains. Let's put birds in the sky. That'll do it. Let's put, and like that. So then this one image that was supposed to take you 3 days, you're now like a month later working on it, trying to figure out why they aren't happy. Like if you're a freelancer, you're probably affecting other jobs that you're supposed to be working on. You're not making any more money. And you're probably too stressed to actually sit down and look at it, take a step back and say, okay, why is there so much negative feedback on this image?
Yeah.
Like when you go out freelancing, you want to be able to say, oh, I know exactly what you're trying to say. Got it. Know how to fix it. Next time comes back, that won't be an issue. And that's like just time and experience and making a lot of mistakes. It's doing it the wrong way.
Yes.
Over and over and over again. And then you're like, oh, wasn't the chair,
I totally
and
agree.
that's
100%.
hard to get when you're a freelancer. or an expensive way to learn.
I have two more questions. One with which I didn't understand before. It's again from Akshay. What should be the pre-production stage for initializing any interior scene specifically? That's one question. And then there is another one which I think it might be easier to answer. Akshay, please, can you ask that again, because I'm not really sure I understand. Maybe Mike, you understand. But anyway, do you find yourself sometimes in need to bounce ideas off somebody since you work alone?
Well, that's a good one to end on. So the pre-production stage for like an interior rendering for me, because pretty much all my projects have custom furniture. Furniture gets done, the room gets built, anything around it gets built. Built, textured, ready for cameras and lights, basically. To me, that's pre-production. And then cameras and lights, and once it gets to a point that I'm proud of it, and I'm like, it'd be something that I'm willing to show to the world, that's the first time the client sees it. When I'm willing to stand behind the image and say, this is awesome. Okay, I can change that. But that's, like, I don't like presenting an image where I have to start off by saying, like, I know this doesn't look quite right yet, and this is going to change. I don't like doing that. I like to sit down and say, like, here's what I think the image should be. And then we start from there. Then do you find yourself sometimes in need to bounce ideas working alone? Yes, absolutely. I have people like Fabio, who's always talking to me. Like, I still have a community of people, even if they're not in the room. And there are a couple of people in my life that, you know, they don't even live in the city anymore, but they're the people I'm like, dude, I need you to put your eyes on this image. Something's not working, or, you know, whatever else. Like, even though I'm working alone, I'm very much not like head down, not interacting with the rest of the world. Because I think that, you know, the thing that you're sitting there like, why is this image not working? Banging your head against the wall, a fresh set of eyes from somebody else, especially if they don't know anything about the image, can usually look at it and be like, yeah, well, then, that's wrong. That looks terrible. And you're like, oh, fuck yeah. There it is. In the VFX world, and this is something that I do with my friends and my friends do with me, paint overs, right? Like, take that rough rendering, put it into Photoshop, beat the hell out of it until it starts to look good. Even if you make it black and white, make it really contrasty, whatever else, like, it's usually, for me at least, and this is a personal thing, it's usually details that are confusing me. And I'm like, why don't I like this image? That looks good, that looks good, that looks good. And I'm missing something big picture. And that's where, you know, black and white, make it small, like render it at like 600 by 600 pixels, right? Get the thumbnail to work. However you need to do it, whether it's painting in Photoshop, printing it out and drawing over it.
Like in your video.
Yeah, like it starts with a little sketch, and I do like 8 little sketches that are almost kind of the same. But like, if you can get it to work, Sid Mead, who's like the godfather of concept art. When you think of like futuristic movies from, you know, 20 years ago, you're thinking of Sid Mead's concept design. He starts all of his concepts with the fat Sharpie, the thick one, and he does it 1 inch by 1 inch, right? So he gets black and white and like not a lot of detail. Yeah. He's like, if I can't make it work here, it'll never work, no matter how much more time I put into it.
Yeah, it's true.
So
I just bought a book from him. What a great artist.
I've watched his Gnomon tutorials. They're a little slow, but they're really informative.
Yeah, but what do you expect? You know, he's painting.
He's the godfather. He's sitting there drawing with the Sharpie, making jokes. I mean, it's awesome.
Dimitri says, you know, I showed the image to my wife. I do the same. So, you know.
You have to be careful with that. I showed it all to my wife, and my wife is just, she's very supportive. So she like, sometimes I need someone to tell me that fucking sucks. My wife is too nice of a person to do that.
My wife is the opposite, you know. She's like, she shits all over my work. And one day she came to the office to pick me up, and I was finishing an interior image. And she looks at the image and she goes like, did you do that? I was like, yeah. Whoa, it's beautiful. I was like, what?
Why are you so surprised?
What? No, because she never said that, you know. So I was like, Jesus, I'm getting good at this.
you need people that like give you the feedback that you need. Yeah. Some people just need to have their hand held and be told that, you know, like, it's good, here's the things that need to change. And some people, you know, need more of a, like, there's a lot wrong, you have a lot of work to do, and here's some of the things to start with. And it's, you know, you kind of have to figure out what works for you. Like, the people in your life that give you the type of feedback in the manner that you best respond to it, because your clients are going to give you criticism and probably not a ton of praise, right? And it's not always the constructive type of criticism that you need. You need people in your life that you need to learn how to take criticism. Super duper important, because it's not personal. It's about selling a project at the end of the day. So it's not even about your image necessarily. Sometimes it is. A lot of times it is. But you do need people in your life that can give you constructive criticism in a way that's constructive, right? Like, they can look at your image, see what's wrong with it, see what's working, give you direction and which way to go, but also deliver that in a way that you respond well to it, right? Like, I'm pretty blunt in the way that I give criticism, which works really well for some people, and other people hate it. It's up to the individual, you know, like, and you kind of have to curate your own critics. For that.
Exactly. You need to also, you know, sometimes. Yeah, we can start another debate on this, but I agree 100% with you. Dude, listen, we are 1.5 hours in. It's a little bit over the 1 hour time cap that we gave each other. Listen, I'm just gonna stop the streaming now. I want to thank everybody for joining in. Please, if you haven't...
Thank you guys very, very much.
Please, if you haven't done it already, like this video, share it, subscribe to my channel. I have so many more interviews coming up and lives where you guys can ask questions to the best people in the industry. I also have a couple of very weird people coming on the show, but it's going to be fun, I promise you. Mike, listen, I just want to take the chance to thank you infinitely much for the time that you gave me.
No, my pleasure.
If people want to get in touch with you, where should they look?
My Facebook is not particularly private, Mike Golden. And social media wise, I'm on Droki on Instagram. Is probably the easiest way to catch me. Most of my professional work I can't release for like a year after I finish it, and then I'm not that excited about it anymore. So I'm not diligent about my...
This looks old.
Like, I thought I was better than that, you know? Then that means you're growing, so that's great. But yeah. Droki is the easiest way to find me, either on Instagram or Facebook.
Dude, you have a good night. Guys, good night, and I will see you hopefully next week.
Thank you all.
Don't go anywhere. I'm going to stop the streaming and then I'll say goodbye to you.
Sounds like a plan, my friend.
See you.